"You're an embarrassment, Dad." That's what my son said to me. Not whispered, not in private. He said it loud enough for my daughter-in-law to hear from the kitchen doorway, standing right there in my own living room, looking at me like I was something he'd tracked in on the bottom of his shoe. That was 22 years ago. I was 53 years old and I had just lost everything. Not almost everything. Everything. The business I had built for 19 years. A commercial HVAC company I started out of my garage with one used van and a phone book. Gone. The house my wife and I had raised our kids in. The one with the deck I built myself. 3 summers in a row because I kept running out of money to finish it. Foreclosed. My credit score looked like a bowling score. My savings account had $214 in it. My truck was 2 payments behind. My son's name is Damon. He was 31 at the time, married, living in a nice suburb of Charlotte, working in finance. He had his mother's jaw and my stubbornness, and he had made it very clear for years that he thought I wasn't living up to my potential, that I could have done more, been more, that the HVAC work was beneath what a man with my capabilities should have settled for. I never saw it that way. I was proud of what I'd built, but when it all collapsed, when the recession hit and 3 of my biggest commercial contracts evaporated inside of 6 weeks, I watched that pride get used against me. I want to tell you something before I go further. I'm not telling this story for sympathy. I'm 68 years old. I'd had enough time to look back on those years without flinching. What I want you to understand is that the worst part of losing everything financially isn't the money. It's watching people you thought would stand with you figure out pretty quickly where they actually stand. My son was the most painful of them, but he wasn't the only one. Let me back up a little. I started Brackett Mechanical in 1987. I was 34 years old. My wife, Joanna, was working part-time at a dental office and watching our 2 kids while I took every job I could find. I drove a second-hand Ford E250 with a crack in the windshield I covered with clear tape for 2 years because I couldn't justify replacing it. We ate a lot of pasta. We took vacations exactly once. Drove to Myrtle Beach in 2001 and stayed in the motel so close to the highway you could feel the semis go by at 2 in the morning. But the business grew. Slowly, steadily. The way things grow when you're not taking shortcuts. By 2001, I had 11 employees. By 2005, I had 23. We had service contracts with 3 hospital systems, 2 university buildings, and a regional supermarket chain. I wasn't rich, but I was solid. My name meant something in the commercial service community in the greater Raleigh area. When I showed up, the job got done right. Damon never saw any of that as impressive. He'd grown up watching me come home dirty, watching me sit at the kitchen table with invoices spread out, sometimes stressed, sometimes not sure if payroll was going to clear. He went to college on loans and some of what we'd scraped together, got a business degree, and came out the other side looking at me the way a person looks at a rough draft of something they've since improved on. I don't think he meant it cruelly at first. I think he genuinely believed he was being realistic. He'd say things like, "Dad, you should really think about selling the business while it still has value," or, "most guys in your position don't have a succession plan." Smart-sounding things. Things that had a kernel of concern buried under a lot of condescension. Joanna used to squeeze my hand under the table when he'd start in on it. She passed in 2006. Pancreatic cancer. 4 months from diagnosis to the end. The speed of it still stuns me sometimes, even now. She was 61 years old. She had plans. We had plans. After she died, something went quiet in me. I kept working. That's what I knew how to do. My daughter Pam, she's 4 years younger than Damon, she called every week, drove up from Fayetteville for holidays, made sure I was eating. But Damon became more distant. Not unkind, exactly. Just absent in the way that hurts more than anger would. Then 2008 arrived. I don't need to explain 2008 to most Americans. The recession hit the commercial construction and facilities sector like a freight train. My hospital contracts got frozen. The university cut discretionary maintenance. The supermarket chain went through a merger and their new facilities management company had their own HVAC vendor. In 8 months, I lost 60% of my revenue. I had payroll, insurance, trucks, equipment leases. I held on as long as I could. I took out a second mortgage. I let employees go, good people I'd worked with for years, And every single one of those conversations cost me something I never fully got back. By early 2009, it was over. Brackett Mechanical filed for dissolution in March. The bank started foreclosure on the house in June. That's when Damon came to visit. I hadn't asked him to. Pam had called him, I think worried about me. He drove up on a Saturday morning and I made coffee and I was trying to explain what had happened. The market, the contracts, the timing. And he sat across from me at the same kitchen table where I'd done payroll for 20 years. And he said, "Dad, I just don't understand how you let it get this far. Not, 'I'm sorry, Dad.' Not, 'What do you need?' Just that." The implication that this was a management failure, a personal failure, that a more capable man would have seen it coming and acted differently. I tried to explain. He half listened. And then, as he was leaving, as he was standing in the living room with his jacket on and his keys in his hand, Renee, his wife, appeared in the kitchen doorway, and that's when he said it. "You're an embarrassment, Dad." I didn't say anything. What do you say to that? I just stood there and watched him leave. He called twice over the next year. Perfunctory calls. Checking in the way you check in on an obligation. And then, nothing. A Christmas card in 2010. His handwriting. No personal note. After that, not even that. I moved out of the house in October of 2009. I had some personal property I'd managed to keep, a little bit of cash from equipment I sold before the dissolution was final, and my truck, which I'd caught up on by then. I found a rental, a small apartment, ground floor, dark in the mornings because the building next door sat too close. $640 a month. I was 56 years old, and I was starting over in a way I had never anticipated. I want to be honest about that period. It was hard in ways that are difficult to describe to someone who hasn't experienced that particular kind of loss. It wasn't just the money. It was identity. For 19 years, Brackett Mechanical was how I understood myself. I knew how to do that. I knew how to run a crew and manage a contract and fix a system that 3 other guys had given up on. Without that, I felt like a man standing in a room where someone had moved all the furniture in the dark. I was also angry. I won't pretend I wasn't. I was angry at the market, at the banks, at the timing. And yes, I was angry at my son. But anger at 56 in a small, dark apartment by yourself either kills you or it becomes something else. I decided, not all at once and not easily, to let it become fuel. I got a job, not running a company, just working. A commercial facilities company in Cary needed an experienced HVAC technician. I was overqualified by a distance, but the hiring manager, a no-nonsense woman named Delphine, looked at my history and told me straight, "You know more than my supervisors. Just don't act like it and we'll get along fine." I liked her immediately. I worked for Delphine for 2 years, learned the way the market had changed, saw what customers were asking for now, what the gaps were and how most service companies operated, what they were getting wrong and charging too much to get wrong. I was quiet. I worked hard. I saved everything I made above what I needed to live. In 2011, I started doing small jobs on the side. Licensed, insured, fully above board. Referrals from old contacts who remembered Brackett Mechanical and trusted my work. I wasn't advertising. I wasn't trying to rebuild an empire. I was just doing what I knew how to do, one job at a time. By 2013, the side work had grown enough that I had to make a decision. Delphine actually made it easier. She told me she'd seen it coming, wished me luck, and offered to be a reference. She was that kind of person. I registered a new company. I named it Anchor Climate Solutions, not Brackett anything. That name carried weight I didn't want to drag into a new thing. Anchor, something that holds, something that doesn't move when everything around it is in motion. I was 60 years old. The first 2 years of Anchor were lean. Not 2009 lean, not desperate, but lean. I had one full-time employee, a young man named Theo, who had more mechanical aptitude than anyone I'd ever hired at twice his age, and we worked constantly. I slept less than I should have. I drove further than was probably sensible to keep relationships with clients in different regions. I ate bad drive-through food at unusual hours, and I did not complain about any of it, because I knew something I hadn't known the first time. I knew how the bottom felt. I knew what it took to get back up. And I knew that if I could just get to stable ground, I'd never be caught overextended again. I was leaner this time. Smarter. I turned down contracts that looked good but felt fragile. I built reserves before I hired. I moved slowly and I moved right. By 2016, Anchor had 14 employees in contracts with a regional healthcare group, a hotel management company, and 3 mid-sized commercial property firms. I moved into a decent apartment on the 3rd floor. Windows that got morning light. It was a small thing, but I noticed it every day. I didn't tell my son any of this. He hadn't asked. I hadn't reached out, and he hadn't either. Pam knew, of course. We talked regularly, and she was proud in the way only a daughter can be proud of a father, which is differently than anyone else and worth more. She offered several times to reach out to Damon on my behalf. I told her each time the same thing, let it be. I wasn't punishing him. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't sitting on information about my recovery as some kind of strategy. I had simply decided that rebuilding my life did not require his approval, and so I built it without seeking any. In 2019, I was approached by a regional private equity group that had been tracking Anchor's growth. They were consolidating HVAC and facilities companies across the Southeast, building a platform. They wanted to know if I'd be interested in discussing a sale. I was 66 years old. Theo had grown into an operations manager I trusted completely. The business was healthy, the team was strong, and the timing for once in my life was right. The process took about 14 months. Due diligence, negotiations, lawyers, adjustments. It was tedious in the way all careful things are tedious. But in September of 2020, I sat across a conference room table and signed documents that sold Anchor Climate Solutions for $47 million. I drove home in my truck, a 2017 F-150, the nicest vehicle I'd owned in my life, and I sat in the parking lot of my apartment building for about 20 minutes. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like I'd proven anything. I felt tired in a clean way, like after a long hike where you went further than you planned but made it back before dark. I called Pam. She cried. I told her I was fine and meant it. About 3 weeks later, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Dad? I knew his voice immediately, even though I hadn't heard it in nearly 10 years. People don't change as much in their voice as they do everywhere else. Damon, I said. There was a pause. I saw something. About the sale. Anchor Climate. I didn't know that was you. I didn't know you had. He stopped. How did you get this number? I asked. Not angry, just curious. Pam, he said. I called her. She didn't tell me much, but she gave me your number. I hope that's okay. I looked out my window. October light on the parking lot. The trees at the edge of the property starting to turn. What do you need, Damon? He was quiet for a moment, and then, in a voice that was smaller than the one I remembered, smaller than the one that had said what he'd said in my living room 11 years earlier, he told me. His firm had collapsed. Not the way mine had told. Not the way mine had, not a recession, not market forces beyond his control. His firm had collapsed because of decisions he'd made. Leverage he'd taken on that he hadn't been able to support. Investors he'd misread. He'd been trying to hold it together for 2 years, and it had finally, fully come apart. He was personally liable for a significant amount. He was looking at bankruptcy. He had 2 kids in private school, a mortgage on a house that was now worth less than what he owed, and a marriage that was, in his words, under serious strain. He needed help. I listened to all of it. I didn't interrupt. When he finished, I asked him one question. When things were good for you and bad for me, I said, did it occur to you to ask if I needed anything? He was quiet for a long time. No, he said, it didn't. And I've thought about that a lot. Have you? Dad, I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything. I know what I said. I know how I acted. I'm not calling because I think I deserve your help. I'm calling because I don't have anywhere else to go, and because, his voice broke just slightly, because you're my father. I sat with that for a moment. The thing about being someone's father, the thing I don't think Damon understood until he had children of his own, is that it doesn't turn off. It doesn't matter what they say to you in a living room at 53, or how many Christmases pass without a real conversation, or how many times you've replayed that moment and imagined all the things you could have said. They're still yours. That doesn't mean you owe them everything, but it means the door is never fully sealed. I told him I wasn't going to write him a check. I heard him exhale. I told him I was also not going to hang up the phone. I told him that if he wanted to talk, really talk, starting from that moment in my living room and working forward, I was willing to do that. I told him that I had learned some things in the years he'd been absent about building something from the ground up, and that if he wanted to learn them too, I was willing to teach. That I knew attorneys who could help him navigate his situation, and that I would make introductions if he was serious about dealing with it honestly, and not looking for shortcuts. I told him the one condition was this: we started from the truth. His and mine. No performance, no asking for things indirectly, no pretending the last 11 years hadn't happened. He said he could do that. I don't know if he meant it entirely in that moment. I think he was still partly in crisis mode, still partly hoping this would resolve faster and cleaner than it was going to. But I've learned that people can mean something partially and grow into meaning it fully. That's what I hoped for. We met for lunch in Charlotte 2 weeks later. Neutral ground. A diner, not a restaurant. I chose it deliberately. Something ordinary. Something that didn't require anyone to perform success. He looked older. Tired. He looked, honestly, a little bit like I probably looked in 2009. And I wondered if he recognized that, or if it would take him longer to see it. We talked for 3 hours. It was uncomfortable and necessary and real in a way our conversations never had been when things were going well for him. He apologized. Not in the smooth, managed way he had apologized for things when he was younger, the kind of apology that wraps up a conflict and puts it away cleanly, but in the halting, incomplete way of a person who is genuinely trying to account for something they don't fully understand yet. I told him I accepted it. I meant that too. I didn't solve his problems for him. I kept that promise. I put him in touch with a bankruptcy attorney I trusted. I helped him think through which assets were worth protecting and how. I had 2 honest conversations with him about how he had managed, or failed to manage, his risk exposure. And I wasn't gentle, and he sat there and took it because he was in a place where he could finally hear it. His marriage held, by the way. It wasn't easy. Renee and I have had our own process of coming to terms, and that's its own story. But they're still together. His kids are doing all right. He's back working, building something smaller and more conservative, and he calls me more than he used to, more than he ever did when things were good. The money changed my life in the practical ways. Money changes lives. I paid off everything I owned. I bought a small house in the Blue Ridge foothills of western North Carolina, an hour from Asheville, with a wide porch and a view of the ridge that changes every single morning in a way I never get tired of watching. I set aside substantial amounts for my grandchildren's education, both Damon's kids and Pam's 2 daughters. I gave to a few organizations I believed in. I live quietly and well and without anxiety about the next bill. But I want to tell you what I actually think the $47 million was. It wasn't proof that my son was wrong. He was wrong, but I didn't need $47 million to know that. I knew it when I was living in that dark apartment making $24 an hour and still doing every job as carefully as I knew how. The money was just the measure of how much careful work stacks up over time when you stop caring about the approval of people who withheld it for the wrong reasons. What I actually earned in those years wasn't a company sale. It was the knowledge that I could build something in the silence, that I didn't need anyone to believe in me while I was doing it. There are men reading this, I suspect some of you are in the middle of it right now, who are in some version of that apartment. The small one, the dark one, the one where the furniture of your old life doesn't fit anymore, and you're not sure what comes next. I am not going to tell you that you'll sell your company for $47 million. Maybe you will. Maybe the thing you build will be smaller than that and feel just as significant, because it will be. What I will tell you is this: build it in the silence. Let people be wrong about you. The quietest, most important work of my life happened in years when nobody was paying attention. When my son finally paid attention, I was glad there was something worth seeing. That's enough. I'd had 11 years to think about what Damon said to me in that living room. And here's what I've come to understand. Not as a lesson someone taught me, but as something I had to live my way into. The way a person treats you when you have nothing tells you exactly who they are, and the way you respond to that tells you exactly who you are. Damon wasn't a bad person. I want to be honest about that. He was a person who had learned, somewhere along the way, that worth was something you measured in outcomes, in the square footage of the house, in the steadiness of a paycheck, in whether your father showed up to things driving something he wasn't embarrassed to park. He learned that. And then life handed him a situation where all of those measurements stopped working. And when they stopped working for him the way they'd stopped working for me, he had nowhere to stand. That's what I gave him in the end. Not a check, not a rescue. a place to stand. I think about Pam sometimes, how she never once made me feel small in those years, how she called every week without making it feel like charity. There's a kind of intelligence in that, in knowing that what a struggling person needs isn't to be reminded of their struggle. She had that intelligence naturally. Damon had to earn it the hard way. Most of us do. What I know about building something, really building it, from nothing, when nobody's watching, is that it requires a specific kind of stubbornness. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself because it's too busy working. I had that in me. I didn't know I had it until everything was gone and it was the only thing left. That's usually how you find out what's actually in you. The money was real. The sale was real. But what I'm actually proud of has nothing to do with $47 million. I'm proud that I went back to work at 56 years old, overqualified and underpaid, and I did every single job like it mattered. Because it did. Not because someone was watching. Because that's who I decided I was going to be. When Damon sat across from me at that diner in Charlotte, looking tired and honest in a way I'd never seen from him before, I didn't feel like I'd won anything. I felt like I was finally meeting my son. The real one. Underneath the performance he'd been keeping up for 30 years. That's worth more than the sale. Worth more than any of it. If you're in the middle of something hard right now, if you're in the apartment with the bad light and the furniture that doesn't fit, I'm not going to tell you it gets easy. It doesn't always get easy. But I will tell you that the person you become in the silence, when no one is grading you and no one is impressed and you just keep going anyway, that person is real. That person compounds. Every day you keep your integrity when it would be easier not to. Every day you do careful work that nobody sees, it adds up. It adds up in ways you can't see yet. Damon figured that out when he had no other choice. I would have rather he figured it out sooner, but some things can only be learned one way,